So I get asked this quite often, and that is, when a fancy new programming language comes along, should I learn it? Well, as usual, the answer to that is it depends. So in order to understand what the answer should be, let's just take a really mundane example. Let's say we have this language called Ruby, and you may have heard of it, and it has been around for a little while, but at some point it was pretty new, and it was the hottest thing under the sun. And there were very good reasons for it being the hottest thing under the sun, because it fixed a lot of problems that web developers had prior to the introduction of Ruby to all of us. And so everyone jumped on the bandwagon and they learnt it. And now there are apps out there that run on Ruby, but it's kind of fallen out of favor. That means if you're a Ruby developer, you kind of have to transition to something else, although there are actually still jobs out there for Ruby developers. So that's a cautionary tale using an example, say Ruby. But then at some point, C# came out. Microsoft brought out C#. And you might say, well, C#'s everywhere. I've heard of C#, and I haven't even touched a programming keyboard yet. And you'd be right in learning C#, but when it first came out, you might have said, yes or no, or maybe I should learn this. But it was backed by Microsoft, so everyone said, yeah, we better learn this, because if we want to do Windows things, it's all going to be in C#. So that kind of brings me to my first point. When a new language comes out, if it's backed by some kind of giant, like C# was backed by Microsoft, then you know that you're in pretty good hands and that that language is probably going to live on. Other examples of that include Swift, which is brought out by Apple for iPhone and Mac development. What else have we got? Let me just think. We had Swift. Oh, I just had one in my mind there. Oh yeah, that's what it is. And this is one of the newer ones. That is called Typescript. Now, I don't know the exact history of Typescript, but I do know that Typescript is used in Angular development, which is backed by Google. So you may be in safe hands in Google's hands, because you know TypeScript isn't going to go away. Angular probably isn't going to go away. And in fact, I've done Angular, so it is very good. So Ruby went the way of the dodo. C#, Swift, TypeScript, they're still around, and they were at some point new. So how do you know if you should take on a new language? Well, if it's backed by a giant, you can safely take it on. If it's not, maybe you need to assess the situation. And that brings me on to the next point. And the next point is, what's your situation? If you're learning a new language in order to create something, and you've carefully selected that particular language because it fits your needs best, then you are good to go. Just be aware that after you've made the product and you transition maybe from programming to actually running a company or just running the app and you hire other developers, if you choose a technology that dies, you will end up actually paying more for developers because they'll become rarer and rarer, obviously, because there's no demand for them. So that's something to be aware of. So if I were you, I would only go with technologies that are really, really suited to the particular application that you want to make, and only then if you really, really have to. So you always have to be very, very cautious and think about the future of your applications. Okay, so the final point that I want to bring up isn't really related to should I learn a new language. It's more insurance. So by all means, you can learn a new language, but you should actually create yourself, or not create yourself, you should actually have a banker language. And this is simply a language that you rely on day to day. So, I mean, that could be anything like Java, it could be C#, it could be even TypeScript if you were a web developer, or JavaScript. Because those have been around for a while and they'll be around for a while more. As long as you have a banker language, then you can go on and you can learn anything new that you want to. So a banker language means you'll never be out of work, you'll never not have the tools to create something that you want to create, But it gives you the security that if you go off and learn something new, you can always come back to it, do a bit of catch up, and you'll be okay. So the final thing I'm going to say is related to this point, and that is if you are a beginner and you're looking for a language to learn, start with some of the big ones, Java, C#, TypeScript, something object-oriented, preferably, because that will give you a nice solid foundation in programming, and then later go for the new frameworks. Sometimes when you learn a new framework as a beginner, that framework doesn't really relate all that well to some of these more classical languages, like I've just described, Java and C# being among the two main ones. And sometimes you'll learn things that you might actually have to unlearn when you go back and learn Java or C#. So that's just a little word of warning. So if you're brand new, then learn a foundational language first, then you can move on to anything new. If you can already program, then by all means pick up anything new, but be aware that it could disappear in 5 to 10 years or even less. But also be aware that it might actually be a very good language and stick around for the duration. You know, something like Python, at some point that was new and crazy and wild, like 40, 50 years ago, whenever it first appeared. I think it was the 70s, but maybe you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And that has really, really stood the test of time. It is a very good language, and it is pretty easy to pick up for beginners, not to mention all of the functionality that it has without having all the overhead of a traditional language. But coming back to the original point, have a banker language. Only learn new things if you need them or if you want to satisfy your own curiosity. And the third and final point is if you are a beginner, get one of the foundational languages learned first, then you can experiment with new languages. Do you want to win prizes with your newfound knowledge? If yes, then simply head over to iamdev.net/episode 4 and take the free 2-minute test based on this episode. If you pass, then you'll earn dev points, which can be redeemed for real products on our website. So, to claim your points now, go to iamdev.net/episode 4.